So, hello. Today we are joined by Amy. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would love to introduce myself. It's one of my favorite topics, talking about myself. So, my name is Amy Stone. I am in a completely different part of the world than Kelly. I live in Miami, Florida. The things that I do on a daily basis, I have a school for step parents, which I call Step Parent Success School. And I created that several years ago because I am a step parent and a parent. I'm also the host of my own show, which I call The Art of Imperfect Adulting, where I share stories from real people all around the world. And we talk about the choices they've made, the changes they've gone through, and how those things have impacted the path of their life.
Yeah, they were all about stories here and experiences. So yeah, step parent, and that's an interesting subject that hasn't come up on the channel before, but I am aware of the challenges involved in step parenting. I haven't ever been one myself, but it has been present in my family. So yeah, what sort
Yeah.
of challenges do you come up against
So
or do
many.
you
So the
see?
struggle, the hard parts about step parenting are really like you're saying, everybody knows somebody who's a step parent. Even if you aren't a step parent yourself, everybody knows what it is. People know people who have gone through it. The data, at least in the United States, of how many step parents there are is really not great because we don't ask on any one place about if there are step parents. Actually, this long-term sort of longitudinal research about families is something where the UK really, really excels and the United States does not. Like
Right, I
there's like a
didn't know that.
really famous, yeah, there's like a couple of really famous studies from the UK where they've been following people basically since like World War II, like the same
Okay.
people, and they check back in with them. And we don't have anything like that that I know of. And so the data is sort of estimates and it comes from different places, but some people estimate that, at least in the United States, as much as 40% of adults will at some point identify as a step parent. And that's a wild thing because there's very little support. You get married and you take on the role, and nobody puts you through a training, and nobody hands you a guideline, and nobody tells you what you're doing. It's just like, go make it up on your own. And many, many people, including myself, would say that the transition is very, very stressful. It's intense. It comes with just major life shifts. If the people who are parents all know that that transition to go from not being a parent to bringing home a newborn, that's a very, very big shift in anyone's life. But you have that 40-week period where you're getting ready for it. You're growing that little human being, and you're adjusting at least a little bit to the idea. And in my life, I was a step parent before I was a parent. So like one day I lived by myself and I was dating somebody who had kids. And the next day was moving day and I was part-time living with kids. And it really was that immediate. So it can be really intense. And I did not, my stepkids are grown. They are 30 and 26 years old. And so that was a long time ago that I went through that. But about 5 years ago, I started mentoring and coaching step parents and offering to share my experiences with them as just somebody who had walked through it, and raising my hand and saying, I've been through this. And then I built the school. The experiences that people go through, like so many other things in families, right? Each one is decidedly unique, but then also there are a lot of really common elements, things that are common that people struggle with. Who am I in this new family? Who are the kids to me? Who's allowed to do what in the family? Who gets to discipline? What are the jobs in this new house? Where do I belong? How am I supposed to treat these other people from the first marriage? In my case, there's not always another marriage or a former spouse, but in my case there was. It's like, who am I to them? Where do I sit when we go to, a school play with the stepkids? All of those things. Those are some of the big things. That who am I going to who pays for things? How does the money work in an extended blended family? All of those kind of things are big conversations.
Yeah, it is really complicated as well. So some of the conflicts that I'm aware of is if the children don't like get on with the step parent, and that can be for various different reasons. Sometimes because the conflict between the parents who've split up. Uh, um, yeah,
Yeah, there's an almost unlimited reasons, right? It's a brand new relationship, like everything else, right? There's no guarantee that the stepkids and the stepparents are gonna get along. There's no guarantee that, I mean, we like to think that it's guaranteed that parents will like their children, but the truth is that's not always the case. There are millions and millions of people running around the globe who don't speak to their parents, who don't speak to their children. Very sadly, there are plenty of adults who treat their children, their actual biological children, horribly. So, it's not a guarantee that when we're blood related to people that we're gonna like them and take good care of them. But it's definitely not guaranteed when you pop into a new relationship. When I was a new step parent, somebody told me that the younger the kids are, the more likely they'll accept you as a parent figure, an adult figure, a guardian figure in their life. That did work out to be true in my case. The youngest was only 4 when I met him. He doesn't remember a life when I'm not in it, so he was young enough that he was still taking little kids take assistance and guidance from every adult that's around, total strangers.
Yeah.
The 2-year-old will walk up to a total stranger in the park and be like, "Hey, help me with this juice box because I can't do it." Right. So the young kids, but the older one was there. And then if you've got teenagers or adult stepchildren, you're joining a relationship because people recouple now at all
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
ages, right? So those are even more complex relationships, but I don't know of a time where it has ever worked to force people to get along, and I think that that's one of the pieces that I offer to step parents who are going through this is, like, what we do is we sort of put the framework in there and try and make ourselves available and design a system where there's an opportunity and time for that relationship to grow, but if you try to force it, everybody's gonna be unhappy. One of my one of the how did I know this person? Anyway, the hardest thing, so do you know the show? It's an old show from the US in the '70s, The Brady Bunch.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Okay, so in The Brady Bunch, the story is these 2 parents are both widowed, and they each bring their kids who are teenagers at the time. They're, like, young and then up to teenagers, and then they all live in the same house. Because that's Hollywood. In that situation, all the kids always get along, and it's delightful, right? In reality, every time I've run into a story where people are merging teenagers, the kids are like, "Whoa." Like, they're not looking for more adults in their life, and you can't just throw teenagers together and be like, "Hey, by the way, now you guys are family."
Yeah.
"What? Share a room with your new sister." "Excuse me, what?"
It sounds like it's a great opportunity to like have a play date, like someone available all the time to do stuff with, but actually, yeah, life doesn't work like that, does it?
Well, think about how hard it is when you move in with a roommate in, like, university or college for the first time. It's like, doesn't always work, it's complicated, so
Yeah.
living with people is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I skipped all of that. I've only ever lived with like family and in relationships.
That's true. That is a more like in the States, it's very, very common to go and live in the dorms at the schools, but
Well, it is
it's
here
not
as
as
well. I'm just a bit
okay.
of an oddball.
There, well, that's all right. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. So there's other stuff that you do in your business as well, and other than your step parent thing.
So yeah, so I do coach step parents and I have the step parent school and then I'm launching early well in January it's launched. I started Imperfect Adulting, which is a broader topic and based on the idea. So the origin of Imperfect Adulting, which I love to talk about, is that I want to build a community where people who are interested in personal development can come together and talk about it. And at the time, I was very focused. Like the people I was coaching were step parents, but when I was a new step parent, I was never really looking for a community of all other step parents. I wanted to be included in the bigger group of parents and the bigger group of adults. And so when I sat down and said, "Hey, what's the community that I want to build?" It wasn't going to be just step parents. It was going to be
Hmm.
inclusive of step parents and a place where people who are who are not working on, but who like the idea of personal development and self growth can come together and talk about those things.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult thing to go through is self-development because as you grow, you change the way you behave, and then the people around you struggle with that because they haven't necessarily changed. I've been
Yeah.
through counseling training, so that was like that shifted a lot of my relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you find anytime you find so the words I use to describe it are like a lot of times our networks, our circles of acquaintances and friends become very tightly siloed. And so maybe we have a group of people we've known since we were young. They've known us forever, right? And if you go through a change, maybe not everybody in that group does that. Maybe you have a group of friends that or advisors that is really rooted in the age of your kids. So, you know, a lot of parents who have other kids in primary school. But if you, anytime you have a question that's outside that, if you don't have a group to talk to, if you don't know anybody who's been in that spot, it can be really hard to figure out who to ask for help. It's like when you buy a new appliance and you don't know anything about it. If you don't know anybody else who's got it, you don't know how to do it. The first time you live on your own, you're like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? If you don't know anybody else to ask, it's hard to find that answer. And my solution that I'm offering is to be in a bigger group where what brings people together is not how old we are, how many kids we have, who we're married to, where we live, what our hobbies are, but rather just that we're interested in this common topic of how do we do this? So like, you know, talking about general relationships and connections or talking about health and wellness in its sense and just that thing and bringing people together to
Mhm.
work on those things inside this space.
So do you have like a structure for it, or do you allow people to bring their own stuff to work with, or how does it
So
work?
yeah, it's a great question. So every month there's a theme. In June, it's relationships and connections, right? So and then it's talking about like what are the relationships in your life? How do you want to feel about the relationships in your life? What are the options for different ways to think about relationships in your life within the context of like a family? One of the things that I offer to people is that, you know, it's not some parts of our family we have control over and other parts we don't. But I introduce the idea or I offer the idea that maybe our happiness overall is not actually directly tied to the titles and identities we give ourselves within a family. So, you know, I'm sure you like, I know happy people who are married. I know happy people who are divorced. I know happy people who are widowed. I know happy people who are single, all of those things. So opening up the idea for those kind of things. So I introduce a concept. I do a monthly pep talk where I come in and pep everybody up. We do a training and we do an office hour style Q&A where people can just bring their questions to talk about. And it's not that I'm trying to train everybody on one specific method of how to be a great person, but it really is like a place to bring ideas and I'll talk to people about it. You can open it up to the community, that kind of thing. And then a general connection event, like a get together and talk about fun things where I introduce conversation topics and people talk to each other.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah. So how big are your groups?
This is new. It's new in January, so it's very small. In fact, sometimes at this point, it takes a group has to get pretty
Yeah.
big before it shows up group like to schedule meetings. So I tell people all the time, I'm like, everything I do is asynchronous. I'll run it live. You know, a couple of people will show up, but you can watch it on recording. And I tell people when I'm promoting it, I'm like, this is early enough that honestly, if you come to something that's a group, you could get the benefit of just having me one on one. Like you, it's like a great. That won't always be true, but right
That's
now
the
it
thing
is.
though,
Yeah.
when you're starting something off and
Yes.
then you're like, well, how to start a group when I haven't got a group of people? How do you build a
Right.
group?
Right. And some people jump from one to the other. So they have one existing group and then they open a new one. They've got a following that is pretty
Mhm.
big. Mine is not so huge yet. It will be hopefully in the future.
So what kind of challenges come up in the group so far?
So, what kind of group things come up in the group so far? People talk to me. People do still talk to me a lot about their families. They talk to me about their kids. So I don't know if they. So one of the things I help people with is conflict resolution within. So how to have a conversation and dial down the stress level. As part of my work with families, I got trained as what's called a mediator, and so I can help people walk through that. And those are a lot of the questions that people ask me. Like they're like, how can I have this conversation with
Yeah.
somebody? So like is what this is, we do a lot of talking about what is the role of what is my job in this house? How do I change what's expected of me inside my family and the people I'm living with? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would imagine that's quite a difficult thing to, because people have expectations of each person in the house.
Yes. Oh, so yes. So it is, I think this happens in a lot of houses. People I really wish that I could teach people how to read everybody else's minds in their house, but it doesn't actually happen like that. A pretty high percentage of the conversations in a family can usually at some point or another be broken down to the fact that somebody's making an assumption that another person knows something that they may not. Parents do this all the time. Adults do this for kids in the house. They're like, you should know how to do this. And it's like, well, let's back up and ask them, do you have any idea how to do this? Do you know how
Hmm.
to set the table, or do you need me to show you? And that's a really simple thing, but we do jump that, and we do that with the people we share our houses with the other adults in our house as well. So I've got college age kids now, and so every time they come home from school, it's like, all right, so we have a conversation. It's like, remember, you're on vacation, but I work. So, if you're up till 3 o'clock in the morning being loud, expect for mommy to bring it up that it's time to be quiet in the house.
Yeah. I think it's hard to know what other people know how to do though. I think
Yes.
for me, like in the past, I think I've expected that if someone doesn't know something that I'm talking about, then they'll ask. But as I've got older, I've realized that people don't do that.
Yes. And so I call it like an invisible rule book, right? Like we all
Hmm.
bring our pasts into our relationship with us. And so we assume that everybody's operating on the same rules, but they're not. So like in the family that I grew up in, we were very quiet when we woke up in the morning and respectful of the other people in the house. And I married into a family where that is not the custom. They are noisy and they don't even know it. They don't even know it. And so my husband is still noisy. I've been married 23 years, and this morning I got up and he was being so noisy, and I was like, "What? Why? Why are you being so noisy?" This was not out loud. It was in my head. I was like, how does this make sense to you that you would be this loud in the house? What I actually did is just went to another room and put on my headphones. But it's still today. It's still to this day, 23 years later, look, we have a different concept of what's okay in the house. And the thing that I think makes it really, really complicated in families forever and ever and ever is that every single person in the family has the right to have the house be what they want, right? Who's making the rules? Sometimes, when you've got adults and small children, the adults are making the rules. But when you've got two adults and then adult children, who gets to decide what is too loud? What should the thermostat be set on? All of those things. Those are conversations where you have a chance to, you should have a chance to talk about them and agree. But just because I like the house warmer doesn't always mean that everybody else has to have it at the same temperature. It just doesn't. I wish it did.
Temperature's a big one, isn't it?
Temperature, I asked somebody on I think so too. Like we have big discussions about the thermostat in my house, but I asked somebody on my show just earlier this week. I was like, "So, what temperature is your house set on at night?" And she was like, "Oh, I don't even know. Other people do it." And I was like, "Wow, that is not the way it is in my house. In my house, it is like a war. It's like you can hear people sneaking through the hallways like beep, 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 adjusting the thermostat, and then another person sneaking, uh, you know, changing it again.
Yeah, I
Big,
don't know, but we tend not to have the heating on very much, actually. We have a very old house and we have a wood burning stove, so we have that on in the winter when it's cold. And I've also got blankets, which
yeah.
I quite like to snuggle up with, and I use those even in the summer because our house is often colder inside than it is outside.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
live in the northeast of England, so you can imagine it's not very warm.
Right. Yeah. You have a different circumstance than you have cold and damp, and we have hot and humid. So the air
Yeah,
conditioning runs. We're cooling our house, and
right.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So you can't really cool down unless you cool it down.
There's a limit, right? There's a limit,
Yeah.
but we will have, and I moved to this climate as an adult because I like the warmth. But there are times where the thermostat is on and it's set for everybody else. Everybody else is dressed and they're comfortable, and I look like I'm coming to your house in the winter. I've got on long pants and a sweater and a blanket on the couch. So we just have a difference in profiles, and figuring out how to make it work is the
Yeah, I
process.
really, really had to get used to the house that we live in. Talking about temperature, I'm just putting the heating on. So I moved from a house which I was I used to have the heating on quite a lot, and then when I moved in with Ian, who I'm married to now, he doesn't like the heating on. It took me some acclimatizing to this big old drafty house that we moved to, and so it was June, and I had me woolly hat, so it was in the middle of summer. Me woolly hat, me fingerless gloves, so I could use me computer and me phone and what have you, bed socks, like dressing gown over me clothes, blanket, the whole works, and I was still freezing.
Ugh, wow.
But I don't need that now. And
You've
I'm not sure,
adapted.
it's a little bit because I've adapted, but also because we've kind of got used to each other and we've changed the way that we work.
That's what I'm talking about. So it's a
Yeah,
conversation because just because he wants it one way and you don't, it's finding that middle ground. And the more people are in the house, the more people should be involved in the conversation.
yeah. But yeah, temperature, it can cause huge disagreements.
Huge disagreements, absolutely.
And meal times as well. I suppose that's another big
Meal times
conflict.
as well. Meal times. Yes, exactly. Because that is definitely a thing that, so when I was dating somebody who had kids, I was not involved in what the kids ate, right? I
Of
was an
course
extra
not.
person. And
Yeah,
mostly we were going on like dates, so it was like restaurants and things like
yeah.
that. But then when we moved in together, it was that, and then there was the combination. My husband and his kids, they were sort of applying the habits and the traditions from the first marriage
Mm.
into the way they were living. And actually, there were probably minor modifications and frustrations that went with that. The big shift happened then when I had kids, and I was like, okay. We need to create some house rules here. Let's make a dinner time. Let's figure out how we want to do this. And there was definitely a point of transition because, my husband and the older kids were like, well, why? Why do you want to do this? And I was like, no, because now we have these other little people who are eating and I'm not going to make 27 meals.
Yeah.
I'm not, so it's here. So there were layers of complexity there. There's one story. I wrote a book about being a step parent, which I call Blend. It's 10 rules from 20 years as a step parent. And I show this story in the book. For some reason, I decided I was going to make dinner for the kids. And I made something that my dad had made for me when I was a kid. And my stepkids sat down and they took a couple bites and they did not like it. And they let me know that they didn't think it was very delicious. And they could have done that probably in a more polite way. But they were little and I'm not making excuses for them, but it turned into a huge fight between us and them. And then the funny part about this story is that I then went to a table by myself and sat down and took a couple of bites and I was like, oh, I don't even like this either. But I could not admit it because I had made such a big stink about it. And nobody had asked me to make that meal. Nobody had told me that I should do that. So I've changed how I approach that. And when I offer things like that to new families, I'm like, yeah, when you're introducing something new, pay attention to whether or not you've been invited to do that. Has anybody asked you to make them dinner? Like what's the starting point here?
Yeah, so in our house, my husband likes to do all the cooking, and I was very, very happy to hand that over to him.
Yeah,
So he
no.
makes all the meals and he does all the shopping as well, so that he buys what he needs to cook with. Yeah, very happy with that.
That works out very well for you guys. And then how do you guys, do you do the cleanup? Like, do you have opinions about
So
what he makes? Do you ask him to make certain things?
not very often. He usually plans what we're going to have. He's very tidy and I'm very messy, so he tends to tidy up as he's cooking. And so then when it comes to doing the dishes, I'll wash and he'll dry. But he's done most of the cleaning up anyway, so there's not that much for me to do, which I just love.
That's
And
spectacular.
he does most of the housework, so yeah, I like
All
that.
right.
It's finding those roles though, isn't it? If
It
nobody
is.
wants to do it, then what happens then?
Right. No, and if nobody wants to do it and it needs to get done, that's a thing. If somebody wants to do it and the other person doesn't like how they do it, that's
Mm-hmm.
another one. My husband will happily go food shopping, but he does not pick the things that I want. Even if I give him a list, he doesn't pick the produce the way I do. So, then I end up in this place where I feel like I have opinions about what he's done, but that's not fair to go back and edit it, to say, oh, you picked the wrong tomato. He went to the store and he got it. So, if I want to pick the tomato, I should do the shopping.
Yeah. So because Ian cooks the food, then he buys what he wants to make as well. And because I'm not cooking and I don't want to cook, I'm quite happy to
Yeah.
leave it to him. And like how I brought up my family and having to think about what to have every day and then making it,
Yes.
and so I'm quite happy just to hand that over.
Which is good. And the thing with our family, so at one point there were 6 people in the house, and the breaking point was there was, dinner every day, which is a stressful thing. But then when the people had feedback, they were like, "We don't want to eat what mom is making, what Amy's making." And I was like, "No, hey, this is terrible. There's a huge amount of work every single day, and nobody's happy." And so figuring out a way to do that so that I
Hmm.
didn't have to deal with pushback because adults are a little better about this than kids, but it's like, like you said, you're like, my husband is picking it up, he's picking it out, he makes it, I don't have to cook the meal, I'm happy. But kids are like, oh, why are we having this? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, let's review. Did you make
Yeah.
dinner?
Yeah, because they don't understand the amount of work that goes into it, do they?
Right.
They
Yeah, they
just
do not.
know whether they like it or not.
Yes, and they want the so we sat down and we were like, we're gonna make a list of all the things people like. And, the first 10 things are all sweets. We like ice cream. We want to have ice cream for dinner and we
Sure.
want to have fruit for dinner. And I'm like, all right, let's keep going because those those two things are not meals.
So you must have found some things eventually then.
We did. We made a huge, and I didn't, somebody taught me this. So we had a whole huge family meeting and we made a list of all the things that people like to eat. And it included takeout and it included special meals. It included treats. And then I would do meal planning for the week and I would make a schedule. And so it wasn't, every day was not something that everybody liked because there's always going to be people have different preferences, but it took the pressure off me being the decider and me being the place where all the blame was going
Uh-huh.
because like say we made lasagna one night for dinner and a salad and somebody's like, "Oh, why are we having lasagna?" It was like, "We're making lasagna because this is so and so's favorite meal. Like this is on there for them." And like, "Okay, and
Uh-huh.
tomorrow is enchiladas or whatever. That's somebody else's request." And so the
Uh-huh.
idea being it's not always going to be what you love, but somebody in the family loves it and it's also not going to be something, that you hate.
Yeah. So you were touched on that as well, and it's housework. It's not just cooking, it's the cleaning and the washing and the folding the clothes and drying it and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no, it's the division of domestic labor is the way we say, and those are the fancy words for that. And that's one of the top things that people struggle with in families. It's also, if you spread that out, division of labor, that's also what drives like workplace arguments. If you're a part of a volunteer group in a church or anything, that's what the fights are. The fights are about who's going to do what and why is it my job and not yours and why aren't you doing your job better?
so have you got any tips for people who are having conflicts around that sort of thing? How do you figure it
Sort of the
out?
same thing. Like the first step is to know that that's what you're fighting about because sometimes it looks like something different. But if you know that you're fighting about who's going to do what in the house, one of the first steps is figuring out what are all the things that actually need to be done in our house. And so that's that. Because there is in most groups, workplace, friend groups, and home, it's real easy to slip into the idea that every single person in the discussion thinks that they are doing more work than everybody else. Right. And so, sometimes that's true and sometimes it's just perception. So, and people don't know what everybody else does. So, really figuring out all the things that they do and how long it takes to do them and stepping out all of the steps because when we've done something, so say you've been, cleaning, get laundry down to a routine. It's like you do it you do it just without thinking about it. All the steps, you forget all of the things like buying the supplies and how long it takes and so on and so forth. And so you fall into this space where it's like, how it's done, but other people don't actually know how much work it takes to do it. And so figuring out all the jobs and all the work that needs to be done, and then doing the work of sharing the information about who's doing things and who's not doing things. And people are empowered to do it their way and get their result, but also everybody in the house is taking but this is mostly adults and older kids, but full responsibility for the things they do. And so one of the big fights that adults have in the families is somebody will say, I need help. like a new parent, like, "I've got too much to do. I need help." And the other person's like, "Well, tell me what you need them to do." And the person's like, "I don't even have time to do that. I need you to know
Yeah.
what to do." And that's a huge stress. And then also everything it's this point where things do need to get done. So the person will say, be very frustrated and be like, "Don't worry, I'll just do it. It's easier for me to just do it because you don't know how to do it." And so the way to resolve that is really zooming way out and being very direct and open with people and saying, these are all the things that we do and who's going to do it. And then when people are doing it, they take full responsibility for the whole thing. They're not waiting for anybody else to tell them to do it. And you've agreed on what the standards are. You've agreed on what the results are. So we have agreement of how clean we want to keep the kitchen on a daily, weekly basis. Like, so we're not going to fight on that because we agree on it. And so, you don't have that argument of this isn't done the way that's a little harder to actually put into practice in most families than it is to talk about it, to tell you the truth. It's a beautiful concept, but the truth is that even within families, sometimes people just don't care about the same things. And so, for example, I don't like to wake up to a mess in my kitchen. If I lived by myself, there would never be plates in the sink. Like, that's just the way I would live. But I am the only person, 6 people in this family, I am the only person in the family that feels that way. And so I'm also the first one to usually go to bed. I get up really early and I go to bed early. So I desperately want all these other people to clean up after themselves at night. They don't care. They're
Yeah.
perfectly happy to do it, and it doesn't bother them at all. So I spent years being pissed off about waking up to the dishes in the sink and asking them to do it and trying to meet these standards. It was really, I mean, it's like I teach this division of labor type stuff. So it was like, I should be better at this. I should be better at this. But the truth is that people care about the things they're going to care about. People are motivated to do the things they want. And you can't really, it's very hard to make somebody else care about something they don't actually care about. So it's very hard. So I was I was creating all this misery and all this frustration because every morning I would get up and there'd be a couple of dishes. And I had to make peace with the fact that I was like, all right, do I want to move and live on my own? Or do I want to accept the fact that these guys are not following the rules and it's still the rules? But, when I wake up and there's a dish or two in the sink, I've got a decision to make. Am I going to be pissed off or am I going to just acknowledge, okay, this is not an emergency. Let's move on.
So do you just do the dishes yourself?
Sometimes, or I walk away to the other room. Like, it's like if I want the sink to be clean, sometimes I'm going to clean the sink because it's me that wants the sink clean. That's not the end of the world. When you're talking about hygiene and like cleaning the bathrooms and clean clothes, some things are more important than that. One plate in the sink is not necessarily a big deal. There are times, so I live in the tropics. We have seasonal things where ants and things are a big problem. Then it's a lot more serious. Then I'm like no dishes because of the ants. Like, that's a family problem. We all agree, but sometimes it's not. Yeah. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
choosing whether or not I want to be upset about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how do you deal with people who, because you don't always get people who are straightforward, do you?
No.
Sometimes people can be quite manipulative.
They can. They can. Yeah. No. How do you deal with manipulative people? You first, it's hard to figure out sometimes that people are manipulative, right? Like, they don't walk up to you and say, "Hey, Kelly, by the way, I'm a manipulator." So usually the first thing is you're like, wow, this is like totally not working out. People say they're going to do this thing and then they never do it. They say they're going to take on this work and then I find myself continuing to do it and being frustrated and trying to figure out whether or not it's intentional or inadvertent. Children often appear to be manipulators when they're really just very small and selfish. Kids are naturally, their world ends right here at the end of their nose. They're just not thinking about it. They need 1,000 reminders for everything. And they're usually not trying to be mean. That's different with teenagers, but little kids don't really have that much things. But the other adults, if they're manipulating, you try it's clarity, like be very clear about the things you're saying, and then you move into setting up boundaries, right? You move into setting up boundaries. So, like, there's a person in my family who will say yes, but then not do things, right? And so learning to deal with that is putting them in a position where they're not just saying yes to something I say. I structure the conversation, I make them say what they're going to do. So instead of you're gonna clean out the garage and they're like, oh yeah, and then they never do it. I will follow up and be like, all right, so let's talk about when you're gonna finish this. What are you gonna do and when do you think you'll be done? And then that puts them in a spot where they have to say, all right, so I'm gonna do the garage and this is when I'll get done. And manipulators will back off. They'll be like, well, you just need to let me do it and trust me. And it's like, all right, fine. Okay, you want to talk about a deadline? Like, when does this need to be done? And
Yeah.
you sort of go around it in the other way. And then sometimes it's putting up boundaries where you're protecting. You're like, no, I'm not going to leave you in control of this because you hurt me when you do that.
Yeah. I find that quite difficult because that's a lot of work
It's
to
a
think about
huge amount of
organizing
work.
and everything.
It's a
And
huge amount of work.
not everybody's got those skills and not everybody cares as much as other people. So about putting that in place. But obviously if you can get something like that in place, it kind of takes all the problems away, but it's putting it in place and
Putting
maintaining
it in
it.
place, yeah. And it depends on how important what you're talking about is, right? If it's your safety, your emotional well-being, those are important things and it's worth taking on the labor. But sometimes these are the kind of conversations where eventually sometimes there's a question. It's like, what relationship do I want? Like what is in this for me at this point?
Yeah. So other than like that sort of thing, how about when you're like trying to work out how to spend like leisure time and stuff like that? Does that bring up conflict as well?
In families with little kids, a lot. So there's a thing that comes up in families. It's actually called the leisure gap, and it's this reality that when you ask mothers and fathers how much time they have for leisure and joy, men have a significantly bigger amount of time that they feel like they have for it than women. A lot of parents, a lot of moms with young kids don't feel like they have any time to do the things they want. And men are like, hey, I'm going to go do this for 5 hours on Saturday. I'm going to go build this thing. I'm going to go play golf. I'm going to go be with friends. I remember one time we had two little kids, and my husband called and he's like, hey, I'm going to go out with my friends tonight after work. And I literally hung up the phone and cried because I wanted him to be able to do it. I wasn't like angry at him that he was doing it, but I didn't have that flexibility in my own life to
Yeah.
do that because I was a primary caregiver and the kids were home. And I was so jealous. So that is absolutely a thing that comes up in families. And it's sneaky. It's sneaky because when it's very easy, most people are very happy to have somebody else take on the workload for them. And so it's like a sneaky, sneaky thing. You have two single people and they move in together and everybody's doing their share. And then you add children and it becomes very uneven and not always in different things, but stuff like that. So it's a sneaky thing the way it slides out and goes to that. But yeah, figuring out who gets to do what and how much time people get. A lot of times, the other thing is when with parenting, new moms often really love being with the baby. And
Yeah.
so then you accidentally set a precedent that it's like, no, this is all I want to do right now. But then fast forward 3 years, you're like, all right, I need a break.
Yeah.
I
But
need
in
a break.
order to get that break, you actually need to plan and make sure that that child is taken care of while you go and
100%.
do it.
And defining what it is that works. Everybody's different with this. So this is preference. For me, when we had little kids in the house, I felt like we were supposed to be doing nighttime dates and going out on nighttime things. And then I realized that that was a bad deal for me because I was then staying out late and then coming home and the kids got up early in the morning. Yeah. Or like I got home and I had to, like, there was a mess from the babysitter or whatever. And I was like, wow, this is a terrible deal for me. It wasn't working. Many other people love it. So that's why I say it's very, very personal. But it's like, what is it that you guys want to do? And is it working out that it's pleasant for everybody? The other thing that I modified when we were at when we had little kids is there's a season where I was like, I am not taking these little people to restaurants anymore because this is a terrible experience for me. We will start going out to restaurants when you are older and you can eat food that comes off the menu, right?
Yeah.
It's like otherwise we can stay home and eat food at home.
Yeah. I think I'm like that now. I don't want to go out at night. I get too tired. I like to go
Yeah.
out in the afternoon.
Yeah. And so, it's the idea that everything should be fine, or that everybody should have a voice into what other people want to do. Like, not when, I mean, we always make concessions to the other people in our family, and that's the way families work. But if you end up being a person that your desires and your needs are not being acknowledged or met, you're not even at the table, that's when resentment starts to brew. So being able to have the conversations about, like, I'd like to go to the movies on the weekend in the middle of the day. I'd like to go on a trip where I don't have to cook all the meals, like whatever it is, that everybody has a voice. Because
Yeah.
there's a joke about parents. It's like when you go on family vacation, you're just doing the same work you do at home, but in another location.
Yeah.
Like the adults are not actually having any fun.
Yeah, that reminds me of my grandparents. So they always used to go camping, but my grandma ended up cooking on a camping stove instead of like having a full kitchen. So it was actually probably harder for her, but she
Right.
didn't really complain.
Right. Well, yeah, no, she may have loved it. She may have loved it, or she may have just, been like, all right, doesn't change anything if I bring it up. So I'm just gonna live through it.
I'm not sure. It was a
Yeah.
long time ago. She's just not here to ask anymore. Yeah, but yeah, that reminded me of that. Yeah, I think sometimes as well, you don't always know what you want. Like sometimes you lose yourself, particularly as a woman. Like you're just kind of so busy, like looking after everybody else. You don't know what you want. You don't know what you want to do. You don't know what you like. You just kind of go along with it.
Yeah, and I hear that. I experienced that some for myself, and I've heard it from enough people that I do think that can be a very common experience. It's absolutely something that I didn't understand how it was even possible until I had it happen to me. I was like, how could you lose yourself? But running a house and having kids around and keeping everything together in modern times is all encompassing and overstimulating. And when kids are little, they need help. Right? They
Yeah,
can't do anything for themselves. And so it's very fulfilling and very demanding to accommodate all of their needs. But sometimes you don't realize that what you're doing is putting your stuff on the back burner until you've done it for so long that it is harder to remember. And then the work is so a true story. This is about 10 or 15 years ago. Somebody asked me, I was in a coaching program, and they asked me to make a list of all the things I wanted. There was like a vision type thing, like make a list of all the things you want and all the great things. And there were things. This person looked at my list and she showed it to me and she's like, "You're not even on here. You've made a list of everybody else in your family and all the things they want." And that was my version of that. I was so used to just doing the work of making sure that everybody else's needs were met that I never took the time to ask myself. And it was hilarious because it was like my closet was full of clothes that other people had bought me as gifts. And I would stand there and be like, I don't really like this stuff. How did it get here? And it got there because I was shopping for other people and not me.
yeah,
And I looked around the house and I was like, why do we have this furniture? All of those things. And then a lot of times it requires some quiet space. I don't know if you've gone through this. It takes some time. You start with like, well, I don't like this. Like, this is not for me. And then it's like, all right. And you just kind of wait until the nudge comes and you're like, this is what I like. I like this other thing. And then you reconnect with your own desires and you can begin to create them. And they shift. Like one of the things that a lot of people call it reclaiming old things. That wasn't exactly true for me because there was like some of the things were the same as when I was younger, but I was older. So some of it was like, well, I used to like this, but
yeah. I think when my children left home, I think there was quite a few years where I was trying to work out who I was and what I liked. It took a long time.
yeah, no. I think that if I was to offer anything, and I don't know if you feel the same thing, is it's very easy to judge yourself in that process and think you've done something wrong. And that's a really nice place for compassion to come in. That's hopefully people listening, hearing that other people go through it will use that as like, okay, this doesn't mean I've done anything wrong. It just means that this is where I am right now. And be patient with yourself, be brave to try new things. And nothing has gone wrong. This is just what's happening right now in your life. It's transition.
In some ways, it's the opposite of that. It's because you've been given so much that you've lost yourself. So it's not. it's not a bad thing. Well, it is, but it's a bad thing for you, but it's not a bad thing for everybody else because they've all had their needs met. It's when you don't get your needs met, and then you're like, well, hang on a minute, and you can get quite resentful and upset when people
Sure
don't
can.
notice what you need and they just expect you to keep running around after them, doing everything they want.
Right. And when you so, very frequently when that has happened for a long time, the first time you ask your family to accommodate the change, they may not they may not be there eagerly ready to make that change because it means that it's going to
Absolutely.
be a little bit more work for them. And so I know in my family they were like, "Well, that's fine, but just do that after you've done all the stuff for us." And I was like, "No, no, no. No." So sometimes it's an adjustment for everybody.
Yeah.
It's
It
worth
can
it.
be, yeah, it can be quite huge actually when you've just done everything and then you're asking for stuff for yourself and then they're like, well, yeah, that pretty much happened for me when I went through counselling training. And I'd been doing everything for everyone else. And then I said, hang on a minute, nobody's listening to me. I'm not getting my needs met and I need to have some of that. And the people in my life weren't prepared to do that for me. So
What do you remember what the
I
first
ended up,
thing that you asked them to change was?
I can't.
Okay.
I ended up divorced, put it that way.
Oh, okay. So it did not resolve. It did not
No, it
resolve.
didn't.
So we did. There was a there was a season in my family where I was driving everybody around, and we had two kids that were driving and two that were not, and I spent all this time driving, and I just hit my limit, and I wanted them to find rides from friends, and I wanted my husband to pitch in more, and nobody wanted that. They wanted me to be at their beck and call, and I just was at my breaking point. First, I started making offers. I was like, "Hey, how about if we try this? How about if we do this? If we do this?" And everybody was just kind of like you're saying. They're like, "No, we like it the way it is. Keep going." And I was like, "Okay, you like it the way it is. I do not." I made such a such a threw such a tantrum at one point that my youngest son brought it up the other day, and it's been like 6 years. He's like, "I remember when you were like done." And I just made my husband do all the driving. I was like, "I've stopped. You guys are not listening. I've spent all this time trying to get your attention, and do these things." And I was like, starting right now, I am not driving anybody anywhere ever again. And we didn't even make it a week. My husband was so defiant. He was sure it was not an issue. He's like, "That's fine." And within 2 days, he was like, "Oh my God, I can't do this." And I was like, "I know. No one can. That's why we have to fix this." And he's like, "So you're going to pick it back up so I can go do it?" I was like, "No, no, no, no. We're not going back to the way it was because it wasn't working for me and just nobody was paying attention."
Yeah.
And that's such a spoiled brat thing for me to get upset about driving the kids around because there's so much privilege in there, right? They have all these
Uh-huh.
activities, stuff like that. But still, it was a terrible time in my life. It was a really, really rough season.
Yeah, but you stuck to your guns and you got what you needed.
Well, I didn't really. I was at the point for myself that I was so unhappy that it was one of those situations where it wasn't really a choice. The choice was me break down or something changed. Like it went way longer than it ever should have.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so and once everybody saw the solutions and they realized that it was at the end of my rope, then they made some changes.
Yeah. Good. So they should.
Yes.
Because everybody in the family's important and it's not fair for one person to feel like they're not.
That is so as the mom, like I felt a lot of guilt for having that tantrum. But now that I'm through it, I can see that that is what you're teaching the other people, the young people in your family. It's like, listen, everybody's needs are important. And so when one person is doing all the work for other people and they're not doing, it's like you're teaching them for the other relationships they have to pay attention to the needs of the other people. So we're raising young adults here.
Uh-huh.
So like, be sensitive to the fact that everybody who's doing things for you, they have needs and desires too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Have you got something that you would like to promote?
So I have at imperfectadulting.com, I have what is called a serenity scorecard. And so you go through and you score it's got all these different categories and you rank all the things that are going on in your life and how you feel about them. And it gives you an idea of what are the things that are stressing you out in your life so that you can then turn around and work on those things to feel more serenity in your life. So that is at imperfectadulting.com. It's free. I'd love it if everybody got it.
Yeah, I can put the link in the show notes.
Yeah. It's right at the bottom of the very first page. So imperfectadulting.com.
Okay, brilliant. I'll put that in the notes. So, Amy, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience and all about imperfect adulting.
Yeah.
It's been a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.